It's Monday, May 13th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, what happens when folks trade urban for rural? Is it a recipe for community growth? Can it help reverse decades of brain drain and population loss? What do you think? The lines are open. And speaking of population, well, here's some, I won't give you too many numbers because, numbers and the radio, not fun. But as of January 1st of this year, the province's population, 540,500 and change. We've had 12 quarters of population growth, 12 in a row. So things are growing, right? Population is growing. But from StatsCan, here's some projections from back in February. In all projection scenarios for population growth or loss for the province, StatsCan says the population of Newfoundland and Labrador will decrease over the next 20 years. That's for all of their different scenarios that they've projected. As you all know, we've got an aging population across all regions, but the pace is much faster in rural Newfoundland and Labrador than urban regions. And of course, like I said, the proportion of seniors in this province. So the proportion of seniors in Newfoundland and Labrador, according to StatsCan, would be the highest in Canada by 2043. So that's some population thoughts as we get into this discussion here today. So over the course of the next 54 minutes or so, you're going to hear from some folks in Port Rexton as well as Bonavista on what they're seeing when it comes to people trading urban for rural and what that has meant for them and their communities. And we'd like you to join the discussion. So if you're someone who's relocated to a rural area, get in touch with the show. Also, if you're in a community that's seen folks come in and you've got thoughts on what it's meant for your local community, give us a call. The number's 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us 709-327-8206. or emails thesignal@cbc.ca. And also, if you're just listening and you've relocated from anywhere else to, it could also be the metro area, not just rural Newfoundland and Labrador, I'd like to hear how that relocation went as well. And we've got a bunch of questions for you. My guest here, John Fisher, once active in field of a community of economic development, moved with his family to Port Rexton 34 years ago to sustain their new life. And they built an inn, now employing 35 local residents. John Fisher, how you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thanks for coming in. So this is one of those ones where, because you got in touch with me for a show idea months ago, and finally we got in touch again. I'm like, we need to do this show. Tell me your overall thoughts on the need for this type of a conversation and why it's important.
Well, I think a lot of people are coming here, and I don't think we've really paid any attention to this really tidal wave of migration. When I came here 34 years ago, people were leaving our ports. There was a brain drain going out. And now it seems as if the brainy people are moving back in again. Sometimes there are Newfoundlanders coming home, and sometimes they're not. I think the cost of living in a city, housing in particular, has become prohibitive. I think we now have digital networks which are easily accessible, and working from home is also an accepted thing, certainly since COVID. So putting all that together, people have moved to these, what they think are these communities lost in time. We were that way when we first came. It was the idea of moving to another place. But actually, when you're moving into a rural community here in Newfoundland, and I think anywhere probably in Eastern Canada, you're really moving into another culture, another way of thinking. People's worldview is a little different than yours. And the temptation always is you're attracted to these places because they're uncomplicated. People live collectively. They're warm and so on. There's an absence of anonymity, you're known, on the one hand. On the other hand, you really think that you've got some smart-ass answers to their problems.
Yeah.
And so you then want to start complicating things, which is what you really left in the first place. So why would you do that? So it takes a while. I mean, somebody should produce a manual of how you actually enter somebody else's culture. And it's not just here in Newfoundland, it's around the world. The name of the game is stay humble and learn, and stay quiet and learn.
This story that you think that you're saying you feel not getting as much attention from the folks who track things as perhaps it should. Where do you see then things going for potential for rural parts of the province that are getting like Port Rexton or Bonavista? They're getting folks coming in.
Well, I think there seems to be two kinds of councils in rural Newfoundland, but what I can tell is the circle the wagon kind of a council that sort of seems to not be very happy with strangers walking around the town. My friend Mike Patterson has a wonderful line when he moved to Upper Amherst Cove in the Bonavista Peninsula. They thought he must be a part of the Witness Protection Program because he left job-rich Ontario for job-anemic rural Newfoundland. Why would he do that?
I mean, the fake mustache was a bit...
Yes, I'm wearing the baseball hat saying... anyway. But, they moved for the reasons that we moved, I think, partly anyway. That was we didn't like the rush and push of urban living. We moved out to Peterborough because we actually couldn't afford a house in Toronto for $100,000. Those houses are now going for $1 million.
Yeah.
But then over time, for me to get to the airport, I was traveling across the country. It took me 3 or 4 hours to reach from the airport, Toronto Airport, from Peterborough. That's only about 120 miles. And, it just didn't seem to make any sense to us, and makes even less sense now. 34 years later, we're feeling pretty smart that we're here in Newfoundland. It has been an incredible experience for us and for our 2 boys.
We've got... let's go to the phone lines. We've got Michael on the line from Bonavista. Hello, how you doing?
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great. How are things?
Good. I'm just sitting up right now on the ridge between Elliston and Bonavista because I can't get cell coverage down in Elliston. So.
Well, you're loud and clear right now. Tell us about yourself.
Well, my wife and I moved here in 2021. We got married actually during the pandemic. I'm from the United States, originally from Kentucky, and my wife is from British Columbia. And when we decided to get married and that I was going to immigrate, the question was, where are we going to live? So she lived in the Fraser Valley, not far from Vancouver. And as people well know, the housing market there, the price of land is astronomical. And so what we were faced with is the idea that we would probably couldn't afford much more than a condominium. And that simply isn't the sort of lifestyle we wanted moving forward. We wanted to live... now, at the time, I lived in an off-grid cabin in the woods, and my wife had a condominium, and we both agreed that we would love to live in a place with a little bit of property, and a place close to wild spaces, and we also wanted to start to grow some of our own food. So we searched far and wide, Adam, and frankly, we just couldn't find anything reasonable in British Columbia because once the pandemic got on, even places like Powell River that we were considering, the property values shot way up as remote workers from Vancouver started to migrate out of the city.
Right. Yeah. And when you say shot up, like what? How far did it? How much?
Oh gosh, I think the last I had stopped checking, it had increased probably by 35 to 40%.
Okay. Yeah.
It just was outside of what we felt we could afford, and we didn't want to be strapped with a giant mortgage. So, Newfoundland is one of these places that I think, at least for Americans, we don't know much about. And so my wife and I started researching and really quite fell in love. I mean, we watched, I don't know how many programs of Land and Sea. And I started listening on a daily basis to Patty Daly on the Open Line. So we took a bit of a risk. We sold everything and moved here, and we'd heard things about Bonavista. I'd had a conversation or two with John Norman, and it seemed like some good things were happening in this region. And here we are.
All right, so here we are. It's 2024 now. How is it going? Like, how have things been going for the integration into the community, putting down roots, and how are you feeling about it all?
Sure. Yeah. Well, me originally being from Kentucky, I grew up in a rural place. There's a lot of similarities to rural life where I grew up, even though I've lived in more urban, sort of, I don't know what people would consider progressive places since then. So I wasn't completely unfamiliar with rural life. But definitely there's a unique culture here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And there are aspects of it that has been a real adjustment. And then there are aspects that I guess you could say remind me of home. We have become friends with a number of older folks here who I can literally pop in any time, and they're getting out the tea buns, and we're having tea together and having a chat, and it's really, really wonderful. We have developed certainly a community. A lot of us CFAs have found each other. There have been quite a few of us that have moved here to this particular area, and so we're developing I think a good sense of community. Both with some locals and with other CFAs. But we brought our work with us. We opened a clinic here called the Tamarack Wellness Collective. I'm a registered psychotherapist, and my wife is a registered massage therapist. And there was a gap in services here, particularly for her work. So she has become very popular here in this community and surrounding communities. And then my clientele, I see people from all over Newfoundland, Labrador, online, as well as local clients. So it's working for us.
Well, I'm glad to hear it's working. Then, as you look at, you look at Bonavista, you look at the area, the folks who have moved in, including yourselves, and that integration bit that's going on. What do you think then are some lessons for either where you are or other communities on what could happen with community growth and prosperity to get more folks to kind of move in and set up shop like you've done?
Well, I mean, we've gotten to know a number of people who've moved here recently, and like us, many of them have brought their work with them. And as John pointed out, we have the infrastructure now for people to work remotely. And so that, to me, that makes good sense. Like if someone's looking to, I don't know, live in a piece of paradise, I mean, that's how we see it. We absolutely are in love with the beauty of this place. And we've embraced foraging life. We get berries in, our fish, mushrooms. Like we've really embraced what this place has to offer. So I think coming here with the expectation it's going to be like where you came from, or to try to, I've learned certainly from my own experiences that change here happens very, very slowly. So I think you have to be sensitive as you bring maybe new or different ideas that, the folks that live here, they love where they live too, and they've been here a very long time. I think we just have to be mindful of that. and try to become a part of the community. We volunteer quite a bit, my wife and I, and I think that helps with the integration process, or it has helped for us.
Oh, 100%. Michael, I really appreciate your call. You've you really framed things up nicely for the kickoff for the show today.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Adam. Take care, John.
All right, cheers. So call from Bonavista Vista there. Michael, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh, and today we're talking about folks who traded urban for rural, and we're asking what that was like. Also, for residents and communities, for folks moving in, what's it been like for you? What's the community's reaction been? And it can also, if you've relocated to the metro region in St. John's, hey, we'd like to hear from you too. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. My guest in studio is John Fisher of Fisher's Loft. Moved with his family to Port Rexton 34 years ago. Thoughts on what Michael was saying there?
Well, what fascinates me is what he's talking about is that there's now a community of these CFAs.
Yeah.
And I ran into, I think, a dozen of them at the Port Rexton Brewery last weekend. I couldn't believe it. They've actually found a way to get together. These are highly intelligent, accomplished people, mature in their professions and so on. And I think it's just a tremendous asset. I think the idea of a province importing ingenuity as opposed to great big manufacturing plants might not be such a bad thing. And it certainly works in small places where you're probably not going to get a big manufacturing plant. So it brings something to the life. But as I started to say, I think there are two kinds of councils. There are councils, municipal councils, that go out of their way to attract people. John Norman is one of those people. There are councils who really don't think that they want to do this at all. Well, that's up to them, but I think it's a missed opportunity.
We've got Danielle Lethbridge on the line, manager of Port Rexton Brewery's tap room. Danielle, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I was hoping you could paint a picture for us of what a busy day in the tap room is like when you're getting folks from who grew up in the region or some newcomers who recently moved there, sitting around and just enjoying what you're serving up.
We get a lot of visitors here. We get a lot of tourists here in the summertime. We have our shoulder seasons and our winter seasons that are a bit slower for tourism, but we've got a lot of locals and now local CFAs joining our area that, this is their local watering hole. It's where they come on a weekend to hang out with their friends and catch up and play trivia or listen to live music. It's just become a real popular spot to hang out with your friends, meet new people. We've, as a bartender for the last 7 years, I've met countless people, tourists and, new locals or locals. Myself, I'm not from Port Rexton. I grew up in Shoal Harbour, about an hour away.
She's from away.
I'm the CFA.
Yeah, that whole hour, yeah.
But, I moved here. I worked here for a year before moving to Port Rexton, and the community was great about welcoming me to this community. It's been lovely.
And so what's that vibe like then when you get like, the brewery set up, and you mentioned, so I mean, there's the tourism bit, sure, but then when you got folks who've been there for generations, and then also some of the folks who are saying, hey, no, like yourself, hey, I want to choose. I'm living here. I'm going to work here. I'm choosing this spot. What's the dynamic like from your vantage point?
It's really cool to watch. Like we have all of our staff here that work the bar, all locals, whether they've grown up here and live away for school and then come back in the summertime, or they're live here all year round. It's really cool to see the bartenders interact with these locals that come in. Like everybody's become friends and everyone's become family now. So it's really interesting to watch. And I work a few beer festivals throughout the year, and we get to meet people that have been to our tap room. And countless times I get oh, we've been to your tap room, and, we walked in there one time, and it felt like home immediately. Like, we've always felt welcome. We pride ourselves on that and being a welcoming, quaint, eclectic little tap room, but we're pretty proud of how friendly and welcoming, and, you never feel awkward here, I find, which is great, and that's what we want.
Yeah, it's a form of community building, right? Like when you have a business like that where everyone feels welcome at, and then folks can come in, socialize, get to know one another. I mean, that is a form of community building.
Totally, yeah. It was this building, our taproom building, was originally a schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. Then when they built the new Bishop White School here, they converted this building into a community center. There was some of our bartenders have had their baby showers here. One of the owners used to come to dances here. So it was very much a community building. And then when Sonia and Alicia took it over to turn it into a tap room, we've wanted to stay very community-oriented. Yeah. And, we do things for the community. We hold functions. We hold fundraisers. And we want it to be a place for the community to gather. So we like to have it still kind of say it's still a community center. It's just under, a new name. It's not the Thomas Rex Community Center. It's the Port Rex Brewery Tap Room.
More than anybody, although I think you've actually found a way to join the new people with the people who've been there for a long while, and I think that that's a very healthy dynamic, and you guys have done a terrific job in that.
Yes, thank you, John, very much. Yeah, that's what we want. We want everybody, whether you're, just moving here or you're just visiting or you're here for the summer, we want everyone to kind of feel like they're part of the community, part of the family. So.
And how tourism season? How are stuff looking for the weeks and months ahead?
Really good. May's always a bit slower for tourism. It's still kind of cold, but we still have, we've seen a couple from Germany last week in a big camper van. A lot of families from the States right now. I think a lot of people are hopeful for icebergs this time of year, but, it's slowly picking up, day by day. And I think, after this long weekend here in May and the weather starts to warm up, we'll see even more people. But the summers are always great and busy here.
The name of the game is don't tell Europeans that we don't have spring, because they do have spring and they think it's warm here in May, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
But, tourism is one of the reasons why a lot of people have moved here. They've seen the place. And we've had Fisher's Lofty, I think, can count 6 homes that have been built by people from away because they first came here just for a weekend or a one-day visit. And like me, when I first discovered Newfoundland, I just couldn't believe it. I thought, my God, I didn't think a place like this still existed on the planet.
Well, Danielle, good luck now with the season and everything. I appreciate you taking time to chat with us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, cheers. Danielle Lethbridge there, manager, Port Rex and Brewery's Tap Room. John Fisher, yeah, like you mentioned the homes that have been built, right? Like it's...
Yeah, I have some difficulty. I think everybody, if they have the means, should have a second home if they want a second home. And that's still an affordable option here in Newfoundland. Probably isn't in Muskoka, Ontario, for example. But on the other hand, I am really concerned. We need to have a balance here. We're hollowing out communities when 66% of your housing stock is owned by people from away. Yeah. Some of those people live there year-round and make contributions to the community, so they're really not what I'm talking about. There are people who come, Newfoundlanders, that come to these places, several weeks a year and just about most weekends and so on, and they also make a contribution to the community. But when you've got people who have just owned a second home as an investment but make no contribution to the community, I think we're talking, and we can have so much of that, but the idea of having a majority of your housing stock turned over to that kind of thing, you're hollowing out a community, and that's what a community is supposed to be. I know in the United Kingdom, it's a major issue for people. It's also driving the cost of housing up so that people can't stay in those communities or move to them. So we need a balance, and municipalities, I think, are going to have to pay a lot more attention to this. this issue. But what we're talking about here are people who are relocating and want to make a living and make, you heard Michael talk about volunteer contributions and things like that.
Yeah, being part of the community.
Yeah, be part of the community. And then Danielle is talking about people integrating and mixing it all up together. I mean, probably one of the best strategies to have if you have a lot of people from away is to have a tap room, because people are getting together. They're knowing that they're lovely people each, and they're getting along and making a go of it.
Yeah, because it is so easy. Back when either I was living in South Korea or living in Japan, it can be so easy to hang out with folks who are like, quote unquote, what we used to call like expats or something, right? Yeah. But then you realize it's like, oh, I'm not part of this community or country whatsoever if I'm just hanging out with folks who are not from here originally.
Although most of the people come from away, their interest is getting to know local people.
Of course. Yeah. Well, and this is what we heard with Danielle there, right? When she talked about the interdigitating of folks.
Yeah. You think it's about selling beer, but it's actually not. You're right. It's a social milieu, which I think is an extremely healthy dynamic. And these places, like an English pub, are really important. And today we live in a technological bubble. We get into a car, we close the doors, and we turn on the radio, and we're in a bubble. And that's how we're living much of our lives. So we need to get back to being social. And the one thing about social, you cannot tell anybody who's grown up in a rural community in Newfoundland about sociability. They have it down pat. And that's what I think people from away have come to learn about and be a part of.
Bonavista Mayor John Norman is on the line. Mayor Norman, how you doing?
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming out. So, I'm here with John Fisher. We're talking about folks who are saying, hey, like this urban living, we want to trade it for rural living. And we've talked about different examples of that. What's the Bonavista experience with newcomers coming in? And we just heard from Michael talking about him and his wife setting up shop in Bonavista. So just wondering if you as mayor can talk about just what you've seen in your time as mayor for folks moving in and trying to kind of set up and build community.
Sure. Well, we've seen, obviously, like much of the region, a pretty major, significant change over the past number of years. New people moving in from other parts of Canada, from outside of Canada, often bringing their jobs with them. Maybe they're work-from-homers, digital nomads, or they may be entrepreneurs or having a career shift and they're launching businesses. And that's one of the more exciting pieces we've seen in Bonavista in recent years, the sheer volume of new businesses, enterprise that are opening up. And that's really creating a hive of activity in the community that a lot of people are really excited by. And, of course, as a rural community, an hour and a half off the Trans-Canada, it's completely required for us to have any sort of future. It's to see the town evolving and growing and diversifying socially and economically.
Do you have any do you have any idea around like population stats or new business startup stats for any of this in recent years?
Yeah, I chair the Regional Chamber of Commerce for the Bonavista Trinity area, and the business startup rates are incredibly high. We've engaged since 2017, 2018 through the Chamber, the Harris Center, and other academic institutions for years, studying and tracking startups. In a 3-year period just in the Bonavista area, we had 52 or 53 new businesses launch, and those are manufacturers, especially manufacturers, exporters, maybe they're in culinary or accommodation, but they're varied and they're certainly very exciting. And what we've noticed specifically in Bonavista are the groups, the cohorts that are moving in are predominantly very young. When we look at where Bonavista was maybe 10 years ago and the average newcomers that were being noted in the community, higher average age, usually retired if they were moving in from outside without a connection to the region. That's been really turned upside down now in recent years. We have a dropping average age. Almost all of the entrepreneurs up and down Main Street in the downtown core of the community are in their 20s and 30s. And, they're making chocolate and ice cream and roasting coffee beans and launching restaurants and manufacturing salt and shipping it around the world, making soap and shampoo. And the list goes on. and the Chamber of Commerce operates a shared workspace called the Commons, one of the only places that's like this outside of St. John's in the province. And it's not uncommon any day of the week to go in, and there's an architect there in his 30s working at one desk, and he's from Toronto, and there's another guy, a software developer from Calgary, working from another corner. This couldn't have been dreamt of 10 years ago, I don't think, in Bonavista, but it lines up with where we felt things were going in recent years, and it's this trend of belonging, as John and others have mentioned, a connection to place and a community that they want to be a part of. There is this growing minority group, and I speak to a lot when I'm on speaking tours within the country and beyond. They feel disconnected and isolated, actually, in their large urban environments, and they want to reconnect to nature, to society, to environment around them, and have this trend of belonging a part of their lives. And that's very indicative for a lot of the people showing up in Bonavista. They're leaving very large urban environments and wanting to be a part of something else. And, meet people at the local pubs and restaurants. And we have a major social enterprise called the Garrick Theatre, a year-round space in Bonavista. And any week of the month, you're seeing more and more newcomers and come from away, new residents of the community showing up here, meeting, greeting, socializing, and they're very excited with all the networking that's happening.
What are some of the unintended consequences? Like, John Fisher here was mentioning some real estate. There's been tons of discussion and news coverage around pockets of, the housing issue across the whole province, but Bonavista's been part of that conversation. Port Rexton's been part of that conversation. What is it with housing when it comes to some of the unintended consequences with this?
Yeah, obviously we've had a major housing crunch in recent years in the town of Bonavista proper. We've got a number of housing projects underway right now. We've broken ground on 2 developments, I think, so far, that are going to be about 25 new housing units. The town has also signed a partnership with Habitat for Humanity, and we're arranging land for them right now. But there were also legislative pieces that we had to deal with, and I think we were the first, or one of the first, municipalities in the province a couple of years ago to really begin the process of tightening regulations and restrictions around things like Airbnbs and other platforms that offer similar hosting. And that has put a major slowdown in the conversion of long-term rentals or private detached homes into these accommodations. We were seeing dozens and dozens of permits, sometimes in a month, of conversions happening up until these change of regulations. And now it's much more uncommon. We've put on caps of a certain percentage per street, per neighborhood. If streets or laneways are a certain size, I think it's either 7 or 10 houses, but I'd have to get my zoning officer with me. Any street that has fewer than that number of houses can no longer have any accommodations on them. They're considered small private residential laneways. And this was necessary, and it was challenging for the municipality to implement more, bylaws and restrictions around what people can do with their private residences. But what we had seen is what's being seen in many parts of rural Newfoundland, Atlantic Canada, and beyond. Affordable real estate being bought up by those that have a lot of capital. And oftentimes they weren't coming in and buying, a single house. They were buying 2 or 3 or 4. And when you times that by a few dozen people doing the same thing, that can have really deleterious effects for communities like Bonavista. And we saw it, we noted it, and we're trying to help the situation right now. And I think we're making good strides in that.
But it's turning a community into a resort in the summer and a ghost town in winter. When the school bus doesn't have anybody to pick up in a community, there's no future there. And what John is talking about, I think, is reversing this trend, Adam, that you were talking about earlier, and that is that we're going to have the most old retired people in the country at a certain point, and this is youth coming into these communities. John, have you had many conversations with your municipal peers? Is this a trend that others would like to adopt, or are they resistant?
There are some that have inquired. A few municipalities specifically have contacted myself or some of the management team at the town hall. Twillingate comes to mind, where you have a critical mass of at least a few thousand people, but they are seeing these high level of conversions and so on, and the housing crunch as a result. And it comes to a point where the town, like in Bonavista, has to make a choice. And when you start hearing about homeless in a community of under 4,000, that's a real issue. And it's a social issue, but it's also an economic issue. When you have these young people, entrepreneurs, when you have a bunch of workers, the fishery, tourism, and some of these other manufacturer businesses, they require employees. That's incredibly difficult to maintain or grow your business and your enterprise within the community when there's nowhere for workers to live. Not everyone has had the luxury that I've had in recent years, where we've bought some houses and we house a number of our employees ourselves. Otherwise, they would have not been able to move into the community. People from Ukraine, people from the Philippines. And it's either not available price-wise because rents have really gone up significantly, or more often than not, those houses that were 2 and 3 and 4 apartments within the buildings have been entirely converted in recent years. So at least we've put a stop to that.
We've, as a business, we have donated 4 acres of land to Otter Housing, and they're about affordable housing for young people. And I think next year they will begin to construct on that, and that's another way to find a home for people who want to come and work and live in these communities.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's I say it a lot on the show. Things are complicated, right? Like if you can take one thing to say, well, this is a quote unquote, like a good news story or something that needs to be looked into, but then there's always so many other layers, and what else needs to be talked about for the full consideration of what
needs
we're
management.
About.
And I think the great thing about Bonavista is that they are not fearful about management, and they have the skills and wherewithal to do it. And I think perhaps some municipalities don't have that capacity, and that's a problem. But John Norman has done it. It can be done.
Okay. Well, Mayor Norman, I want to say thanks for coming back on the show. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
John Norman there, Bonavista Mayor. Folks, you are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh, and John Fisher is here with me in the studio today. We're taking a look. We're talking about folks who want to trade urban for rural living. And we're asking, is it a recipe for community growth? Can it help reverse decades of brain drain and population loss in areas? What do you think? The lines are open. If you've got a relocation experience to share with us, give us a call. Or if you're in a community that's seen a bunch of relocation, or you would like to see some, get in touch. 709-722-7111. 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. You've had talk to me about 1996.
Well, in 1996, I was employed as a consultant by the Economic Recovery Commission, and I set to work to look at alternatives in rural places, and came across a movement in the United States called the Lone Eagle Movement, and these were people who were moving to rural places and would, as John suggested, have their work with them, or they were in touch with the head office in an American city, but they were stuck out there in the country. And it was an idea which seemed to me to be just brilliant, but in one sense, it was ahead of its time, or I was just a naive consultant, so we'll take the latter, because I wouldn't think I was that prescient 28, 26 years ago. But essentially, I proposed that, we have what we have now happening then. It didn't work then, really, because we didn't have the ready access to digital networks that we have now. I think the idea from working from home hadn't caught on quite the way it caught on from COVID, and there were one or two people doing it, and there has been for, I think, 30, 40 years here, but there wasn't certainly a movement as such.
So all you needed for your idea to work was functioning internet and a pandemic.
Yes, that was it, and it's now working.
It's there, but it is here. It is, of course.
It's amazing. I mean, I think there's a whole pile of people who are probably not calling in because they're not that kind of people. But it was simply remarkable. And there are frustrations. I mean, we've set up a business in Port Rexton, and we're very happy to pay our taxes in Port Rexton. It's a heck of a good place to live. But over the hill in Trinity East, you don't have to pay taxes. All you have to pay, we pay about $17,000 in taxes a year, and in Trinity East pays $300 for the garbage and fire protection. And I was always taught that if you want to avoid paying taxes, you have to move to an island in the South Pacific or something, and here we have it next door. So I can see that politicians have their difficulty in taxing people who are not paying taxes currently, and we have a lot of those unincorporated communities. Over time, I think that will evolve. The main in the game is not to get mad about this, is what's happening.
No, you're just highlighting the differences, right?
Highlighting the differences and being tolerant of those differences, as inequitable as they seem to be. And in time, it will fix itself. There will be universal taxation, there will be regional government and so on. But it will take a while for those things because people who were brought up in these places didn't pay any taxes originally. They weren't subject to regulations for all manner of things. And they're living free and wild, or they have been. And now suddenly, since the 50s, we've started to regulate. I think in the beginning it was things like septic and sewer, and then it was electrical, and now it's pretty much everything. And I can see the frustration on people's faces because they were not born in a culture of regulation.
We had a call. Someone just left a message. John O'Day wants to ask you if you've heard from folks who've moved in, right, newcomers, about the topic of poor cell signals, which, I mean, when Michael from Bonavista called at the beginning of the show, he's like, I'm in the sweet spot or whatever it was right now, right? Poor cell signals, and also the issue with roads, right? So if you're talking about the potential to set up shop or like a business if you're working remotely or setting up a new business, you do have those ever-present issues in certain parts of, or in swaths of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah, it's called infrastructure. Because Elon Musk has now, 2 million satellites settling the Earth all the time. And what I find, a lot of rural people are using that service.
Starlink or whatever, yeah.
Starlink, yeah. And it's very reliable and relatively speaking, inexpensive.
Yeah.
So that's one bit. Did you mention roads? Mm-hmm. Roads, yeah. Well, the thing about a Newfoundland highway, certainly going up the Bonavista Peninsula, if the guy before you driving looks like he's drunk, he's just avoiding the potholes.
Yeah. Well, we brought the show out last summer, and we're like, okay, it was a bit of swerving around. There was I would just say there was a pothole or two, of course.
Well, it's
like, but does that if someone comes in to kick the tires to see if they want to, fine. They look at the old commercial or what Michael was saying. They watch the old Land and Seas. They listen to Patty Daly for a bit, and I want to check this place out. They come in. Is that going to dissuade you?
No, I think people come in fueled with idealism. I think that in many ways that's a problem. Is that people have an idealistic view of what all this is, and it takes a while. I mean, I think we made every conceivable mistake you could make. We thought it would be really nice to get people back traditional dancing, and basically somebody sort of turned me at the end and said, a local said, Jesus, John, why don't you just leave us alone? Yeah. And I'm with him now completely. I think you have to be humble, you have to be quiet, you have to take time to listen and learn. I still nonetheless think that it's a wonderful mix, and it deals with the issue of demographics. These communities are full of people. I'm almost 80. Most of the people I know in our community are not necessarily my age, but they're in their 60s and getting older by the year. Yeah. And you wonder who will be the last person to turn off the last light in the last house.
No, so for me, thinking about it, and like the demographics that I spoke about at the beginning of the show, projected in the next 20 years, no matter what, the projection from StatScan is we're going to decline.
Yeah.
But you look at certain communities, I see it almost as like continuing to build that, whatever metaphor you want to use, the runway or the jetty or something, but you're continuing to build the length of the community, the prosperity of it by getting folks in now to keep those population numbers up.
But two things I'd like to say. I mentioned this issue of taxation disparity and things of that sort. But on the other hand, I had a spell in hospital and I came home and there was a guy with a fruit basket to welcome me home. I didn't actually know this fellow that well. It was from the Lions Club. And it was just fantastic. I mean, I'm still thinking about that. That wouldn't have happened to me in Toronto.
No. Yeah.
And that's what these communities still have. I mean, these places are socially highly sophisticated, socially. And I think they can teach us an awful lot about sociability and getting along with your neighbor and living collectively. I mean, the interesting thing is, if you go to the Toronto Islands, and one of the things on the ferry to the city or from the city to the islands is people are talking about what is a community. Well, if it's a community, you don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
We just know what a community is. Yeah. It's a sort of a pretentious thing, or it's an artificial thing or something. And here, I think people just innately know what community is. And in that vein, I think they can teach those of us that come from the outside a heck of a lot. And if we're smart, we'll learn.
What was it like? When did you notice, I should say, that things were changing in Port Rexton from when you first set up to what we're talking about where we are now?
Well, I'd like to say when Fisher's Loft Inn opened, but that would be a lie. It changed when young people came in droves because Port Rexton Brewery was the first brewery in rural Newfoundland. Yeah. And the girls behind it, I should say the women behind it, I get myself into trouble saying girls these days, looked in Nova Scotia. And there were more distilleries and more breweries, and they couldn't find room. So they decided to do it in Newfoundland. And people said, well, it won't work in Newfoundland because it hasn't worked. Yeah. And they did it. And it was the same for us. There was that. I think one of the problems is that people in rural Newfoundland don't really appreciate what they have, and that's normal. I grew up in the English countryside with churches that were 1,000 years old, or
and you're like whatever,
and you just take it for granted. That's not special. I take my friends home from Canada there, and they go, "Wow, you were brought up in a house that was 600 years old," and I go, "What are you talking about?" And it's the same here in Newfoundland. The natural assets, the social assets here are extraordinary. And I think that we don't have to go around promoting that necessarily, but I think municipalities should be aware of this potential, and I think they should be finding ways to harness this potential, knowing that all the time we need a balance between what's there in terms of people and place and what's coming in, and not letting what's coming in dominate over the other.
I think it's interesting now where you have your Bonavista story for what it is, your Port Rexton story for what it is. If you have other communities out there that are looking ahead being like, gosh, we've got one or two kids in the graduating class or none this year. But if there is that, maybe we can look to another community to see what's working, what's not working, what the lessons learned were, and then just to have that, just to inform folks for some of the decisions that they're making for what they're trying to do. I find it fascinating.
Yeah. And, and where there is taxes, we're adding to the tax base. Yeah. Those 6 new homes that I talked about, added to the tax base. We need services to attract young people. A community without services is of no interest to families with children. They want a skating rink, perhaps, even though, of course, they could use the ponds when they freeze over and things like that. But, you do need services. You need a place where people can socialize, the brewery in our case, and so on. I just think it's an untapped resource. And I think with a little more focusing and a little clever marketing, perhaps, we can build on this. And if nothing else, it will answer the demographic issue, which is hanging over us.
What's the outlook now for yourself and the season, Fisher's Loft, and with the family?
Well, you never go into a season feeling confident.
Okay.
Every year I figure we're going to go bust, but because the first 2 weeks of May, other than those Europeans who show up and thinking we actually have a spring here.
Is that conversation always interesting for you when folks show up and they're just like, oh, it's spring, we didn't dress properly, and you're like,
Well, you get to feel terribly superior, like they had that. Yeah, no. I just enjoy weather.
yeah.
I enjoy whether it's raining, whether it's foggy, whether it's snowing, and everything else. And if you don't enjoy weather, don't come to Newfoundland.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a hotel in British Columbia, I think, that actually advertises storms, and they will equip you with rubber boots and wet gear, and go and enjoy the storm. And that's what you should do, and that's what most people, I think, do. Don't come here for the sun.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm just bored silly with sun when there's too much of it. But there's always something to do if you have a mind to do it, and it's a place full of a chance to explore. One of the really interesting things that we don't think about living here, I remember last year an actor landing in St. John's, and he was going up to Gander to perform in Come From Away. He was being interviewed on CBC about the show and so on, and he wasn't interested in talking about the show because the one thing he couldn't get over, and he kept talking about endlessly, was what he called the endless forest. He couldn't believe on the TCH going from St. John's to Gander how much space there was out there.
There's a lot.
There's a huge amount, and from people from Europe, it's an unheard of reality. It's also terribly exciting, and in a way, it's a little frightening for people. We don't think of all of this space as something that is unique and interesting and attracts people. But it does. And I haven't got over that interview. I didn't hear one word about the show, hardly. It was all about, geez, how do you live in all that forest, you know?
Yeah.
And it's wonderful.
No, and I appreciate this conversation today because of like the amount of talk around perspective that we've had, right? And what can be big for one person because they haven't experienced it before. It can be just like the same old thing for another.
Yeah.
But it's just about being able to see it and the benefit for it, for what it can mean for you and your community and the future of your communities, and province.
Yeah. As I said before, I think it's a lost opportunity, and I think mayors. John Norman is a stereotype. I think, not he's a stereotype, but he's doing stuff that I think people could learn from.
Yeah.
And you know, it's come with its challenges. I think he alluded to that. You have to be a bit brave. You have to seek to establish those balances. We don't want these communities to become places dominated by people from away. We want that culture. We want those people who have always lived there to be there. But you know, people here think a bit differently. I mean, my version of a rural life, especially with the fishery and the ocean and so on, it was reactive. People here are very, very good reactors. They can cope with almost anything thrown at them. On the other hand, the language of planning is almost alien. Because when you're in a position where all you have to do to survive is to react and make do. And you know, the economic development world says rural places are imitative and urban places are innovative. Well, the thing is that if you can go out with a gun and bring dinner home that night, because you've always done that, it'll work. But if you go out there, somebody says, well, let's throw a net over a bunch of ducks or something. Well, nobody's going to look at that because it hasn't been proven to work.
Yeah.
So I think a survivalist background will teach us care and caution and imitation. Whereas in a city, you've got so many safety nets underneath you and new ideas that it lends itself much more to innovation.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting down anybody.
No, you're just talking about a reality of what you've...
It's innovation is not overtly in the culture. Imitation is. And it's extraordinary. When we came here, I couldn't believe what the average male and female person living in a rural community could do. because they were direct descendants from people who survived impossible odds.
Oh, it's back when folks used to, like from everything. You want to make a boat? I can make you a boat. You want to, fix a fence, build a house, salt some fish, do whatever. It was all possible because everyone was doing everything. Yeah.
And life had purpose and focus, and I think it probably even helped any of the mental health issues as well. Everybody knew what they could do something.
John Fisher, thanks for this today. I appreciate it. All right, folks, that is it for today's show. So if you've got thoughts, listening to the chat we were just having there, and for some of the calls, if you've got a story to share about relocating, if you were someone who thought, enough with this urban style of living, I'm thinking rural, give us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca, or call the Signal line and leave us a message, 709-576-5260. Also of note, most of our shows these days are being put up on YouTube afterwards, typically in the afternoon. So go to CBC Newfoundland and Labrador's YouTube page, because we've got our own Signal playlist there, and you can just check out past shows, this show, yesterday's show, tomorrow's show as well once we get it up. So do that if you have a chance. I recommend it. Looking ahead to tomorrow, Gardening Day, the second gardening day of the regular gardening day season. David Goodyear from the Homestead in Flat Rock will be my guest. He will talk about the expansion of perennial food systems and propagation of perennial trees and plants, plus tips and techniques for a productive home garden. If you have grow questions, or you just want to update us on the start of your grow season, get in touch with us. And as always, thanks for listening.